welcome to Soul of Travel podcast. I'm so happy today to be joined by Catherine Gallagher. She is one of the co-founders of Women Travel Leaders, which is where I was so fortunate to meet her. And I've really loved being a part of that community, especially the past few years as we've collectively navigated all the hurdles that we've come across during the pandemic. It's been such a great space. So I can't wait to talk a little bit more about the importance of community, the transformational power of travel, traveling with our kids, all these things that we have in common. I'm really excited to be able to jump into that in a moment. So Catherine, welcome to Soul of Travel.
Amazing. Well, thank you for having me. And it's been amazing having you as part of the community of Women Travel Leaders.
Thank you.
So thanks for being there.
So happy to be a part of it. Obviously, community and travel are my two favorite things, and community of women especially. So it's such a great space to be for me for so many reasons, not just because of the support, but just to be in that space is really special. As we get started with our conversation, I just want to explore a little bit the maybe winding path that has shaped you and led you to where you are. I think so many of us in the travel industry looking back have a little bit of that, the winding path, but it really is important in shaping who we are and what we're passionate about and what we hope for the future. So I would love to have you share a little bit about how travel first became a part of your life and how that has really impacted where you are now.
Cool. Okay. So I always had a desire to travel. My uncle's been a big inspiration to me. He was always traveling. And so he'd always be coming back from these sort of exotic, or I thought exotic trips. And be like, oh, I'd always really love to kind of know more about where he's been and his stories. And but it wasn't until I was 16 that the first time I ever went on a plane, and the first time I ever went outside of France. We used to go on the occasional trip to France, which I'm based in the UK, so France was just a hop over the pond. And the first big trip I took was when I was 16, and I went to Sri Lanka for 4 weeks. It was through a local church, and I lived quite a sheltered existence. I basically grew up, well, not completely, but sort of for my teenage years in a forest. So, you know, I'd had this sort of wanderlust that I'd never really seen the world. And then, so I got to go to Sri Lanka, but I didn't just get to go on a holiday, vacation. I actually got to stay with families. We stayed in a convent. We got to meet so many interesting people, and we met with Sinhalese, Tamil families, and lived with them, which was amazing. So for my first experience of travel, that was pretty epic. And it was a real culture shock that I didn't realize I was having until, you know, I was a couple of weeks in. It's like, yeah. So, and I think now I've been through life as far as I am now. It's only when you get older that you sort of start looking back and you're like, those kind of trips did shape me, and you don't appreciate it at the time. You don't realize the impact of those trips. And it really helped to kind of appreciate the value of student travel, you know, and those kind of, and voluntourism if it's done in the right way, and experiences that give you a chance to, I know it's an overused word, but give you that kind of authentic experience of the place that you're traveling to and the people that you meet along the way. So yeah, that's kind of the first entry really into travel, which then a year later was followed by an expedition to Ecuador, where I was mountaineering, and completely different kind of experience, more adventure focused. And I had to do a selection weekend to get to go on that, which there's another whole kind of story with that that I won't go into now. And that was sort of just a completely different experience to Sri Lanka, but both epic. So I think those kind of trips really gave me even I knew I wanted to travel, and that just confirmed it. Yeah.
I love hearing those stories because, like you said, reflecting back, you can see how that shaped you in the moment. It's just the experience that it is, and I think that it should be like we should be in the moment and not thinking about what that experience will mean later. I mean, sometimes I think we are, but like as you look back and as you were talking, I was like, oh, I can see how this relates to this thing in your journey and how this relates to this thing in your journey. And I even think with my kids, like my oldest daughter is getting ready to do her first school trip at the end of this year, going to Costa Rica with her history teacher. And I just am like, oh, I know what door that's opening for you potentially, you know, and it's so exciting for me to kind of hopefully know what that is going to bring into her life. But I just think it's really cool when we can look back and then see how things started to show us who we are and what we'll love. And I think the other thing that I loved that you mentioned is having this wanderlust or the sense of wanderlust, even though you weren't really exposed to anything. It just was this thing that lived within you. And I feel like I really had that as well. And I've known so many people, I think that it's just interesting how people that maybe really knew they wanted to travel, it wasn't because they already had a sense of how vast the world was. They just had this thing that said, you need to do this. And it doesn't really seem to make sense. It's just this, it's just like it was something that's a part of your DNA that you have to tackle at some point in your life. So I really resonate with that because I grew up in a small town in Montana that I was pretty isolated and, you know, not connected to anything. And I just knew I had to see whatever else there was outside of my 1,000 people in my world. And yeah, so I thank you for sharing that experience. Part of this season of the podcast, we're really focusing on women who are influencing change. I think with women travel leaders, that's definitely such an important thing for me, is to see the opportunities that exist for women in the industry, to see the support of communities and the way that we can come together. But I'm wondering for you, what is that impact that you see yourself creating, or what do you hope that you're creating in the world?
Oh, it all comes back to ripple effect. And I feel so humbled to have the opportunity to be in connection with the incredible women that are in the community, and to see the amazing things that they're doing and the impact that they're having. And I'd really love to think that through building the community, connecting those ladies, and having a place where they're learning from each other and growing together, it has that ripple effect. It helps to spread the ripples further. Whereas if you were, I used to run my own travel business, and I truly wish there had been a community like this when I had my business, because I did feel a bit lost sometimes. I didn't know who to speak to. I didn't know who to trust. And if I'd had other people I could speak to, that business may have been a very different story. At the same time, I feel that was part of my path, and I needed that to happen for me to be in the position that I'm in now. And so it was a painful experience, but one that I hope is going to bear, well, it is already bearing fruit in the way that I see the ripples going out. And yeah,
for me, that is also one of the things that I think is such a privilege. And like, someone will email me after they've been on the podcast and they'll say, so and so heard my episode and now they're, you know, interested in this part of my business, or they're supporting me in this way, or they've asked how we can partner. And for me, that makes me feel really excited about what that means for what this show is creating and the ripple that it can have as well. Or if I see people that I know connecting on LinkedIn that have been guests, and it's really exciting for me. Like connection and community are everything. And so I also feel like that's so important. I realize as we've started talking and jumped right in, as friends and colleagues, we haven't even talked about what Women Travel Leaders actually is. So for those listening, would you share a little bit about this community and who it's for and who it serves, how it serves?
Mm-hmm. Sure. While I remember something that you just said there that I thought is relevant for hopefully everyone listening, is never underestimate the power of a connection or a conversation that you can have. I've had this throughout my life where someone's told me something that they're like, oh yeah, I did this because you said this, or those sort of conversations. So it's amazing the impact that we can all have through showing up. Mm-hmm. So Women Travel Leaders is a community for top level leaders in the industry. We've started in the pandemic, and the amazing Janine Cohen got it started. And we have the most incredible leaders. I'd say we're veering towards business owners who are in the adventure, luxury travel space. And I'm very pleased to say that most of them are interested in transformational travel or sustainable travel and making a really positive difference through travel. So that's really exciting. And a lot of them are small business owners who don't necessarily have the community around them of other leaders that they can talk to. Even though there's all sorts of trade shows and trade events, they're all over the world and they're not always easy to get to. And even if you are attending those events, as you know as well, it's not, you're not going to have deep conversations necessarily when you're sitting sort of listening to someone who's bringing their destination or their hotel or whatever to life. You're not going to get into the nitty gritty of what it's really like running a travel business, or what are some of the challenges that you're facing. Just to have that ear that can listen is invaluable. So does that answer the question?
It does. Thank you. We're gonna talk a little bit more about community in general, so we'll go into it further. But I just wanted people who are listening, if that sounds like something they might be looking for, to know what it was, and we'll also invite people in at the end of the conversation as well. But you were sharing about the importance of those connections and really having, I would say, honest, vulnerable, real conversations, which especially during the pandemic was so important because so many of us were facing challenges we've never been prepared for in our careers at this point. And like me, I launched my business. I'd been in the industry for 20 years, but I launched my business right before, in February of 2020. So I was both starting as a new business owner and just like having no clue how to put one foot in front of the other. And so it was really great to be able to just sit in community and know I wasn't alone, because it, like you said, it feels so isolating, especially I'm a solopreneur. So my business, it's just me and this computer and Zoom most of the time. And that was really valuable. Also for me, the connection with women around the world is really valuable, because I think that's something you don't often get. Even if you go to trade shows, you're still kind of isolated to the region that you're in. So I have loved that aspect. But for you, and thinking about community, I guess one thing that I'm curious about, what is maybe unique to communities of women, especially women in business, and maybe something that either you didn't expect or something that surprised you over the past 2 years that this community has been coming together?
Something that came up to me then, which is slightly unrelated to your question, was more of a personal thing of like community, and how it's like I've realized that it's a massive value for me to have this community. If I'm like, if there's a thing about, if you're feeling like kind of down or not motivated, it's probably because you're out of alignment with your values. And there's a really cool like little thing you can do if you know what your values are, then you can sort of do a checklist and like, oh, it's because I'm not there's no community in my life. So then if you know that, then you go and create it and then you feel great. So that's without necessarily intending to, that's kind of what's happened. And to answer your question about some of the things around women in the travel, women-owned community particularly, well, I think that they're just generally a lot more open and able to be more vulnerable. I think it is actually really important for men to have community as well. And I think the more of that that's done, the better, especially where they have an opportunity to talk, where they have a safe space. I think it's a lot harder though, because they're much more, generally speaking, closed. Whereas I find that from my experience of working with women, that we're much more open and able to be vulnerable. At the same time, you know, I've also observed that women are business women, and they're keen to move forward with kind of some of the practical things. They're much more collaborative, compassionate. And I've got a kind of thing around, I think there's the alpha women. We have quite a few of those in our community. I'm more on the kind of soft power type of woman who I'd love to raise up more of those ladies who maybe are not as confident, not as classically alpha woman. But even so, with all of the ladies, we've got amazing groups where they're sharing their inside secrets with competition. And then they're collaborating and doing like really cool stuff together. And I'm not sure that would happen, one, without community. And I think that's probably something that's quite unique to women.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like that has been such an amazing thing too, to see the collaborations that happen and the willingness to share. And I think for me, part of that comes from like the better the narrative is around female leadership and travel, because we are all doing well, it reflects upon all of us, right? So I think it's the same as if you look at it from a perspective in sustainability or, responsible travel or ethical travel. Like it's the one person that's not aligned with that, or has the bad news press or whatever, like they're the one that you remember, right? So the more unified we are in raising one another up, the stronger we are, the more valuable we become as a whole. So I think so many of the women, we really realize that. And the other thing that I have talked a lot about, and I had a great chat in my podcast with Iris Servanescu about this, so people can jump back and listen to that one. But about this idea, and this is something I had to do in my own mind, was that everything we create is our own and an extension of ourselves. So there really isn't competition per se, because everything that you do, I'm going to do differently through the fact that I'm creating it. And if we're looking at what we're creating being in alignment with our guests or our audience or whomever we're speaking to, we should only be seeking to speak to the person we're meant to speak to. So in that way, there's also not competition, because you, Catherine, as a leader in women's community, are speaking to your people. And even if I'm doing the same thing, I'm speaking to my people. And maybe there's some overlap, and that's where we support one another. But like on a whole, like we are all meant to do a certain thing in a certain way and attract those people. And if we create our businesses in that model, it's just better to know one another. And for me to say, like, if someone comes in and asks me about, this kind of trip to this region, and I don't run that trip, I shouldn't try to create that trip. I should give that person to the person who is going to be best served And so I think that's kind of somewhere in there is also the magic of a space like this is I think we start to see that. And we also don't have to be all things to everybody, which is a huge weight off of our shoulders because we can just say, that's not my expertise. That's not my magic. This is her space. And I'm so glad to give you to them. And I think then it comes back as we work in community. But those have been some things that I've really had to spend a lot of time thinking about because I'm not going to be a multi-billion-dollar travel company tomorrow. I don't know that I actually ever want to be, so I can only do so much and it's okay. So I don't know how that resonates with you, but
I could not agree more. It's like it's exactly what I believe as well. And yeah, I totally believe that if you are in true alignment with yourself, with your values, with your soul, then that you can't go wrong because that's your path. And if you truly follow that path, then yeah, there'll be other people doing something really similar, but it's not exactly what you've just said. It's never going to be the same. It's as you said again. I see entrepreneurship as an extension of self. It is a form of self-expression, and it is you. I've kind of always thought, oh, I'm not very creative. I look at other people who are like really arty and creative, and then like, oh, actually, no, I am. It's just that it comes through business for me, and that's an entrepreneurship. So yeah, completely agree, and I'd love that message to go out further and for more people to appreciate that. And I think that would create a much more peaceful, collaborative world. And yeah, that would really would change the world, wouldn't it?
yeah.
If everybody thought like that.
Yes,
Big
I
job,
agree.
but hey, I think we can do it.
Yeah. Yeah. We're starting world peace right now on the podcast. I really,
and
oh, go ahead.
sorry, I was with you were saying about you about being a multi-million-dollar kind of business as well, and I think that's the other thing. People get so caught up in the idea of, oh, I need to be this, and we all see the various adverts about reach 10 times your business or all of these sort of big goals, and I've been completely guilty of falling into that myself. And not that's all great for people that genuinely want that. And yeah, I would like to have a decent income and have a really nice lifestyle and everything. But it's like you've got to find the right level and the right point for you, because again, you are beautifully unique as you are. And it's like, okay, what is the reality that you want to create for yourself, not for someone else, and not because someone else has said it or some guru has kind of said this is what you need to do. It's like, no, it is within.
Yeah, which I think is also an interesting space, and I feel like a space I've spent more time in the last 5 years is understanding, and you said, entrepreneurship is kind of like how we express ourselves. That is our outlet, and it's like this piece of ourselves we put out to the world, which is also really vulnerable. When you are really creating something and trying to show people that essence of you through your work, but also I think really beautiful when you see that. And I'm very drawn to those people where I can see like, aha, they are letting me see them and they're letting me see what they want to be in this world. But also in business. And I think just in the space of time we're in this, in the history of our world and the history of humanity, is that we're really being asked to know who we are. And we're really being asked to understand the impact we create and the trajectory and the ripple that we create, whether it's positive or negative. And in business, I think we've really been conditioned to, have the education, have the skills, follow the map, follow the plan, do the checklist, succeed. And that doesn't allow for us to be ourselves in that space. And so there's a lot of discomfort for people who are trying to both be themselves and be entrepreneurs or be leaders in the travel industry or in any industry. And I witnessed that a little bit. You and I were both recently together in Slovenia, which was amazing to be together for the Transformational Travel Council's gathering. And I noticed a few people who hadn't spent a lot of time in that space of thinking about who they are and, the beliefs that we hold and how that shapes us as leaders and how that shapes everything. They are still kind of in these two different buckets. They aren't operating with those in a space that's integrated together. Um, and I loved, for me, because I want to jump right into that space with everybody. And I forget that some people are like, oh no, I don't do that yet. I love that TTC allowed that to happen from a business perspective to be more fluid in between those two spaces. So I would love to now just kind of jump into transformational power of travel and kind of what is unique to travel that allows us to have that, and also maybe unique in the travel community that allows us, I don't know if it's unique, I feel like it is, allows us to be who we are in our business, in a way that I think maybe isn't allowed in a lot. I feel like it's in a more creative genre, so maybe as artists or musicians, but I think even as travel designers, like you said, that's our paint. So I didn't really ask a question. I'm
I
realizing.
got that. No, I think no, it's cool. I'm kind of like where I think I'm not sure that you didn't. That I'm just going to go with this.
Yes.
Where I feel like there's an opportunity to create more transformational travel is in for those, but when you're talking about travel, well, it's within conversation between travel designer or travel agent and the client. And I think that I'm sure some people do it very well. I'd love to know who they are if they're doing this. And it's something that I'm really interested in exploring, is how you can, through the kind of sales process and asking questions of your client, how you can you can't really weave transformation into it, but it's more about, it's kind of using coaching. It's using the principles of coaching through asking the right questions to help people to switch that light on that they didn't know was there. And for them to then, it's awareness. It's for them to be able to then have that awareness when they travel, to open their eyes and to see the unseen, that's unseen to them up until that point. And I think there's probably some really simple things that a sales person can do with questioning. And I think that it could mean that they end up converting the client, selling a bigger trip, and for that person to have a transformation experience that they wouldn't necessarily otherwise have had. And then it becomes a much more interesting process for the agent, because you're creating a transformational experience as opposed to a transaction. And then the person who's traveling is going to have a much more transformational experience. I don't know whether it's kind of dreamy, I suppose, to kind of think like that. And I'd love to get some examples of how people have done that. And because equally, I think it can be done where I just think it could like accelerate that, or it could make it happen where otherwise it might not. Because if you're sending someone to, or someone's visiting a place and they're having an experience, then they're going to have just through the nature of the experience, they'll have a transformational experience. You can't make someone have a transformational experience. It's obviously down to where they're at and how the experience is curated and how it's delivered. Where I think there is an opportunity, though, is that for someone who may not have hadn't chosen to have an experience, that through the sales process, then you convince that person to have an experience, and therefore they have a transformation.
Yeah,
So,
it's kind of like front loading how many barriers you can break down and create that openness, because kind of like you're saying, like every trip holds this possibility. And I see this in group travel experiences. Like you take 10 people, or in my case, 10 women on an experience, and everyone has a different experience. And it really comes down to, where they're at in their life journey, what they've been thinking about coming in, why they're coming into the experience, and then how much they've thought about that prior to the experience. And then for me, like I kind of imagine travel just like sitting there waiting to know what it can give you, because I've had it happen where, depending on where I'm at in my personal journey, I will have a very different experience traveling, and recently traveling, now spending a lot more time thinking about what travel can create for us and the awarenesses it can bring about ourselves and the world. Like I feel like travel gives me bigger cards, or like more options to play and to grow. And it's just is that much more impactful for me. And I only think it's because of the openness I have. And it's funny that you mentioned this, like, how could we do this as people selling travel, like bring people already into this conversation? Because right before we got on this call, I was going through, I have this like intake form of getting to know my travelers. So before people travel with me on a sojourn, I want to make sure this is the experience they want. So kind of going back to what we were saying, like, yes, I could take anyone on one of my trips, but I want the people that are going to create community on my experience together. And I want people to have the experience they need. And if I can't give it to them, or it's not what they're looking for, I'm okay that it's not a good match. But part of that process for me is helping people, or helping me to understand, and maybe them to understand their travel style and their travel values, and making sure that experience is aligned for them. And I don't think many people have thought about that. They're like, I love beach vacations, I love being in the mountains. But you say, what are your travel values? They're going to just look at you like, I have no idea what you just asked me. So like my intake process is helping them understand that they have those. And so like one of the questions is, what type of experience are you seeking? Adventure, connection, quiet, relaxation, disconnection. And then like having them say, like, what does your ideal travel experience feel like? And most people probably haven't thought about that. But if you do, then all of a sudden you're going to really realize, like, is this experience what you want? We're so keen to take a vacation or to get away, and we just kind of like jump into it often. And I think we're going to have more rewarding experiences if we do this process. So like I ask people, like, what does this look like? What does it smell like? What do you picture yourself doing every day? Do you like to be in one place? Do you like to move from place to place? And I just think we don't think about it. Like even asking people, like, do you want this experience to be similar to your daily life? Or are you looking for a contrast from your daily life? So yeah, I love that you said that, because I really was just thinking, I'm like, I feel like this is such a valuable process on its own, not just for people applying to take my trips, but that anybody could really use these questions as a catalyst for opening this door and then stepping into a more powerful travel experience.
Yeah, exactly. And when you talked earlier about when we were in Slovenia, and sort of remembering that some people were not like in the same space as you are. And I think it's the same with travelers as well. And the thing that sort of comes to me is that, like, some people there's the people that who are awake and that are ready for this and they get it. There's the people who will never get it. And I kind of hate to say that, because I feel like there must be an opportunity to break through that. But I think there are just some people who are just, they're just, I don't know, they sleepwalk through life, maybe. Is that unfair? I'm not sure. And then there's the people who are seeking, but they don't know how to yet. And I think that's where, like, you can, yeah, there's an opportunity, but it obviously it has to be the right time for them. And there's all sorts of ways that it's just that they could have that moment where they start to see. I've got an example of, I used to do a lot of networking, like business networking. And it was a BNI, when you have to kind of give your 1-minute pitch and then everyone refers business. And we had a Reiki practitioner in the room. And these are all kind of like classic grey suit business people. And because it was referral based and her sessions were like, say $50 or something, it was like, that was an easy referral. So people were like, yeah, I'll book a session with this Reiki person. And so there were several people who went to see her, and it was like it opened a whole new world for them that they did not know existed, and they like believe it themselves. It was just so cool, like, to see that happen. So and it was just an example of how people can be woken up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I just think that I think for many of us, because we've had that experience, that's what we are so excited to bring other people into that experience, and it really becomes less about us and more about everybody else. And I think this maybe can get snarled up in the entrepreneurial experience or business running. And like you said earlier, like, I do want to have a financial exchange and reward for the energy that I'm putting out. But because we are become so passionate about other people having these experiences, we forget about that other piece and like find ourselves really giving and open and inviting people into this space, and forgetting to put a price on the value of the things that we offer, which I think has also been really helpful for women travel leaders to see people who are good at that and know how to value their time and their expertise. So I think that's something that really, that conversation needs to happen a lot more, especially when you're kind of tying these two pieces together.
Yeah, absolutely. It really does. Oh, there's just so much I can talk about on that subject, but and it's a thing that I'm learning about myself. But the conversation around charging fees for agents comes up a lot, and it stems out through obviously pricing. And it's absolutely fascinating how everyone charges so differently, and how, like you say, some women in our community are, well, a lot of them are doing, well, I'd like to think doing incredibly well, and good on them. And I hope we can all be inspired by them. And that I think that's a whole nother kind of conversation around the idea of charging fees for your services for selling travel, and valuing. There needs to be a shift, I think, in the way that consumers value travel agents. And it's not the consumer's fault. Mm-hmm. It's that we are the ones that have to grow our own self-worth and be able to have the right conversations and be able to sell that to the client, and they will value it a lot more as a result. And we've got some examples of women that in our community that do that really well. Mm-hmm. Like Anne McIntyre from On the Map Travel. She's I'm going to get her to do a talk in our community about how she works. And it didn't happen overnight. She built up, from charging a small amount, and now she charges a lot more. And it's cool. And I think we could all be better. Well, not all, but some of us could be better at that.
Yeah, I agree. Well, to shift gears a little bit, I think one thing that would be fun to talk about with you is about traveling with our children. I know that you have a little one that you had a great adventure with last year, and I'm about to set off on a year in the world with my 3 daughters. And so I thought I would ask you, what do you think is special about being able to bring your children into travel experiences with you? And like, how does that benefit them and even you to have those experiences together?
Well, I hope that, I think it depends on the child. And I kind of, well, for me, like, it's kind of too early to say whether Jasmine, my daughter, is going to have the same level of passion for travel that I do. But to answer your question, I think it's an opportunity. It's like travel is always a way of going out of your, not always, but it's often going out of your comfort zone. And of course, that's character building. So I think it's really valuable and important to travel, for your children to travel, but also to travel with your children and to push them a little bit, because I think, I mean, even like at home, sometimes my daughter doesn't want to, she's like, doesn't necessarily want to go to here, there or everywhere. And it takes some persuasion to get her to go, and then she loves it. So I think that it's an important, it's that we live in this age of tech and, you know, too much screen time. And so again, travel is a great way of moving away from that and opening their eyes to so much more than what they see in their on their screen, although they see an awful lot that way, but just to actually experience, you know, hands-on what's happening in different places. And yeah, it's very exciting that you're going for a whole year with your family. I think I totally believe, and I'm sure lots of people listening to this will agree with this, is that travel is by far the best education. And yeah, you can't beat it. Yeah, especially if I think, well, something that I think, having gone on various sort of fam trips and things in the past, where if you have a really, really good guide and someone that can help to bring an experience to life for you, and having, like, yeah, those curated experience makes a big difference as well, because you're learning so much, like, just from not just from being there, but from having the right guides and the right people supporting you on that trip. So yeah,
I think it's a great process to learn about them too, because I feel like even with ourselves, when we're in our daily routines, we're acting one way, or we're following, you know, the flow of our daily life. And when we travel, we have that sense of freedom, and so do they. And then you can start to see who they are a little bit more. And like the last couple of weeks, we went to the library and got guidebooks for the first few countries we're planning to be on. And I just put a sticky note on each guidebook, and I asked them to go through and just like write the pages or the ideas of things that looked of interest to them. Because I mean, we've never traveled like this before. They usually do what I like to do, but I was curious about what they would like. And it's been great to see them do that excavation of like what they're really interested in, and then seeing like how different each of them is. And like my youngest is 7, and she, like, every time she gets home from school, she grabs the Scotland guidebook and she can't put it down, and she's like, I can't believe we're going here, I can't believe we could see these things, you know. And just that process. And also when we started this, like, she was saying, oh, are we going to go to California? Are we going to go to Florida? Are we going to go to Arizona? Like the places in the US she's been that she knows. And like for some reason, like she just couldn't figure out what we were doing, because she hasn't experienced that before. And now having these guidebooks, she's kind of understanding, like, oh, we're doing something bigger than like a road trip to the Grand Canyon. She's like starting to be able to understand, because she's a little too young to understand the greatness of the world. But it's also giving them a part of it. Like my middle daughter, she's just really hilarious that she's like, I don't really want to do anything that's too like nature-y. But she's like, I remember hiking with her once, and she was like, this hike is nice, but it's so like nature-y. There's like bugs and trees and plants and sun. I was like, oh my goodness, I don't know how we're going to do this together, but we'll figure it out. But anyway, that process of like exploring who they are has been really fun for me. And I don't think we often as parents get to spend that much time in that process.
Yeah, it's perfect. And yeah, it's a absolutely brilliant way for us to understand them, and for them to understand themselves.
Mhm.
And how old are your children?
My youngest is 7 and my middle is 10 and my oldest is 12. So
Yeah, so I mean, it's going to be such a life-changing trip that they won't even realize until they're much older, or life, it will really influence what they do. And I think to your point of like the nature thing, I think it's quite interesting looking at, so with Jasmine, she's I'm like really, I want to go up mountains or all of that sort of thing, walking. And Jasmine, I'm thinking, I think she's going to be like my sister, who was always like, oh, do we have to go up this mountain? So, but I don't know, we'll see. She's it's a brilliant way of being able to kind of see what they're into. And she's only 4, so I'm interested to see how that's going to develop as well, because we went to see whales, and it was absolutely amazing. We went out and saw these huge grey whales. It was like mind-blowing. They were absolutely enormous. She was just totally uninterested. Like, amazing thing, how can you not find this incredible? But she just was totally not interested. But what I thought was also really lovely is how she connected with the people that we met, and how they took her in as well. And we were in Mexico, and they were just so brilliant, like they're so family friendly, and that was just really lovely to have that kind of, again, community and that connection. And it's, again, one of the wonderful things about travel as well, isn't it? Getting to meet different people and different cultures.
Yeah, and they have different levels of reservation because they haven't developed all of those ways that we compartmentalize people or create barriers based on assumptions. They have a little less of that process happening, so they're easier to just jump into those connections.
Exactly.
And so I'm excited too for that, because I feel like that will invite us to engage with places in a way that maybe I wouldn't, because I would feel all of those resistances that I've learned. And so I think it will be a great adventure that I'll be sharing with the community as we go through it. But the last question I have, and I know we probably could spend a lot of time talking about this, but just wanted to dive into this with you a little about work-life balance, and as a mom, balancing all of our things that we have on our lists. And I was listening to a podcast the other day, and she was saying how unrealistic it is to have the expectation for women that there is balance to be had. And she was saying that, like, in life, we will ebb between having our energy really focused on business at one time, and with our children at one time, and maybe with caretaking of parents at one time. Like, there isn't necessarily that each day is going to have this grid with balance. And I was thinking, that perhaps balance is really not that we are distributing our energy and our focus equally at all times, but that we're creating balance between those bigger things, and noticing that maybe we've spent a lot of time we're focusing on business, and it's been a while since our focus was on family or on extended family or on friendships, just not like trying to make it an equitable distribution every day. And also thinking like that maybe it also relieves us, or makes us have an awareness that we cannot be all things to all people at all times. Like, that's really what balance is realizing that we can't do that. But I'd love to just hear your thoughts on what that balance might be, and maybe conversations you've had around this with other women, especially in the women travel leader community.
Well, it's something that I would say is a work in progress for me, and something that comes up a lot in the community is around boundaries, and being able to say no, having boundaries around your time. But also with the businesses where they're maybe over delivering with clients, and then they're potentially compromising on the time that they're spending with family. So, and it can happen the other way as well. So I think a lot of it comes back to what we were talking about earlier, with being able to tap into who you are and what your journey is. And rightly or wrongly, I mean, there's some people who they are career obsessed and they don't spend as much time with their kids, and they have nannies and what have you. I don't know enough about people's different experiences, other than I'm just thinking about someone I've booked a holiday for, who they're going as a big family, and one of the one set of parents are like, oh, we just want the kids in their clubs all day and we don't really want to see them. And then the other one's like, I actually want to spend some time with my kids. So I think there is it comes back to you and your path and what's right for you. And then within that, it's like when you know that, then it's about having the boundaries to create that reality. So that's, I guess, my answer to that, but something that made me kind of laugh about, I think, I can't remember exactly what you said, one of the real kind of character building thing for me, or it was being all things to all people, when I went to Mexico with Jasmine last year. She was 3 at the time, and I went out specifically to meet Janine, who I'd never met before, my business partner. We've been working together on this business, and I took my cousin with me to basically be like an au pair for Jasmine. And I found that, and here's me being vulnerable, that I was trying to please everyone. I was like, okay, my business partner, we've not met before, and then I've got Jasmine, I'm doing the right thing for her, and then my cousin, and then who had I left out? Yeah, me. So it was a really important experience for me to go through, to come, and I think you have to come back to yourself and trust that by looking after yourself, and people talk a lot about self-love, self-compassion, it's so important, and links in with self-worth as well. All of this is so important to have that and to protect you, because that's how you can be have a greater influence, and you can have a greater influence on other people, and and you can be better. I've lost the words. It's very simple. I can be a better mum as a result. I can be a better business partner, and by looking after myself first. So I think that's something that's very much like important for all of us, and I think it's something that as women we struggle with.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think you can tell us 1.5 million times and we still, it just seems like it goes against the cultural narrative of who we are supposed to be and how we are supposed to be as mothers and as women. And I think that, again, like amongst community, we can start to kind of break some of that down and accept that it is important and that we do need to create that time for ourselves. And like you said, see how that time that you give to yourself gives back to the other people around you. And, like they say, you can't pour from an empty cup. Like that's just, you really can't, but it's so weird how many times we have to learn that lesson before we learn that lesson. Like it's just a very hard one. So I think I appreciate that you brought that into this conversation. I think it'll resonate for a lot of our listeners. And maybe it'll be the thing that this time, at least one of the women or people listening will really internalize that lesson, which would be pretty great to know that we could have that ripple.
Yeah, and I think that with that as well, it's like you might be brilliant at it. It's like if you get into the habit of doing meditation every day or yoga, and then for some reason it just sort of fizzles away. And it's a kind of reminder as well that you might have been brilliant with boundaries at one point, and it's that reminder that you don't just fix it once. It's kind of keep coming back to it, and you need that. The more support you can have around that, the better, so that you keep being reminded. And it's like, oh yeah, okay, I come back to that. So having that kind of accountability and support is really key to that.
Yeah. And it's valuable. I mean, I feel like that's also really empowering to know that you might have to remember that again, because I think we feel like, oh, if we failed it, then we just have to let it go. We don't get to pick it up and bring it back into our life again. It's not just a one and done thing, but we can do it over and over again. I just think that's really, really valuable for me personally to remember that as well. So before we end our conversation, Catherine, which I am loving, but it's winding down, I just want to remind listeners that they can look in the show notes for information about women travel leaders, and of course reach out to either Catherine or myself. Happy to share my experience, and she can let you know how you can be a part of the community. Also can go back and listen into my conversation with Janine, which was really fun, back in, I think, a year or so ago in the podcast, who is the other co-founder. But before we end, I just have a few rapid fire-ish questions for our listeners to get to know a little bit more about you. The first is, what are you reading right now?
I'm a rubbish reader, but I listen to things on Audible, and most of them are personal development related. And actually one that I've been revisiting is Chillpreneur and Get Rich Lucky Bitch by Denise Duffield Thomas. So yeah.
Perfect. I was resistant to Audible, but I actually really love now listening to books. I think it's a great way to consume that information. What is always in your suitcase or backpack when you travel?
This isn't strictly true, but climbing shoes. So I'll always kind of think, can I, is there any that I can, and then I'll put them in if I can.
Yeah. To sojourn is to travel somewhere as if you lived there for a short while. Where is the place that you would love to sojourn?
Ooh, well, everywhere. But I mean, somewhere that I've been to a lot, but I love and go back to all the time, and I would love to have a house there one day, is in France.
Yeah.
So yeah.
What is something you eat that immediately connects you to a place that you've been?
French bread, while we're on that subject, like a baguette. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or
So
even a really good croissant.
My middle daughter, her dream experience for this world trip is to be eating a baguette while riding a Vespa. This is the thing she wants to have happen. This is like, that's the picture she keeps having of what our world trip means to her.
Love it. That's so cool.
Who was a person that inspired or encouraged you to set out and explore the world?
Oh, I mentioned him earlier on, and my amazing Uncle Andy. Yeah.
Yeah. If you could take an adventure with one person, fictional or real, alive or past, who would it be?
I'm like completely, I do love I'll go with my Uncle Andy again. I'd really like to go to the Himalayas with him, because it's somewhere he really wants to go. So it might be a nightmare if we travel together, but I would quite like to do it. Yeah.
That's good. Maybe he's listening. You'll be off on an adventure. The last one is, the space was really created to amplify the voices of women in this industry, which I know is important to you as well. Who is one woman you would admire and would like to recognize in this space?
That is an impossible question to answer.
I know, for you, this is really hard one.
Because there are many, and you, obviously, Christine, are one of them. Oh. And my amazing business partner, Janine. A couple of members that we've got that I do, Kirsten Dixon, who's one of our newish members, and she's got an incredible lodge in Alaska with, like, it's just, when I hear her, I'm like, how do you manage talking about balance? She seems really chill, but like, I don't know how she manages to do all of these things. And she's got like a massive, did I say, a peony farm, and like, she's a chef, and she's like just multi-talented and does all these really cool things. So yeah, but they all inspire me.
Yeah, that was really an unfair question for you, but I appreciate you sharing. And yeah, this has been such a great conversation. I knew that it would be. I've been waiting to be able to block in a whole hour on your calendar forever, personally and selfishly. So I appreciate that. Thank you for sharing your passion and wisdom with us. And I hope a takeaway for our listeners might be to understand your values, your personal values, and how those are, showing up in your life, whether they are or not, because I think that's something we both really agree is important. So maybe that'll be an
Mhm.
inspiration and a takeaway. But thank you for being here with me today.
Thank you, Christine. It's been brilliant to talk to you, and it's nice to be able to get on the soapbox.
Yeah, thank you.